So, just looking at headlines, it looks like the long running crisis in Venezuela is finally coming to something of a climax, and I think there's going to be very rapid developments in the coming days. Um, the Maduro regime has given American personnel 72 hours to leave the country. The Trump administration says that there are no plans for them to leave. Um, what's happening here is not a situation that some would just dismiss as, oh, it's Uncle Sam imposing its will, because what we see here is there is a consensus among Latin American countries for Maduro to go. And the charismatic young leader, Juan Guaido, who admittedly I knew very little about, most people didn't know much about this guy, has been made acting president, and he's been recognized by Canada, the United States, the UK, Latin American countries as now the legitimate leader of Venezuela, and Maduro as an illegitimate leader. Um, Unfortunately, it's difficult to see a situation where this is going to move forward without further bloodshed, but I see no way forward but for there to be regime change. Now, there will be those who are particularly of left wing persuasion. I mean, you get them in Western countries. I have no doubt Socialist Worker or Morning Star, it's called, will be having an editorial tonight saying American imperialist plot to interfere in Venezuela. Because Star doesn't really care about human rights. They don't really care about democracy. All they care about is their left wing socialist ideology and promoting that. It's pretty disgraceful that the leader of our opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, openly praised Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. But the fact of the matter is, the Chavez Maduro regime, and I put them in as a joint regime because this began under Chavez 20 years ago, has been a complete and utter disaster. On their watch, violent crime has rocketed in Venezuela, making it one of the most dangerous countries in the world for crime. On their watch, families cannot afford basic food, not even medicines. This has become a humanitarian crisis, by far the worst in the Americas, in the entire Western Hemisphere, and it's really tragic. But it's not tragic in the sense that it's a natural disaster. It's tragic in the sense this is man-made. Now, I think this is the time that all freedom loving countries need to just absolutely back change and say enough is enough. The Venezuelan people want Maduro out. The neighboring states of Venezuela want Maduro out. Maduro has to go. Now, surprise, surprise, Russia and China are propping up Maduro. Um, China is coming out with the line about internal affairs. Well, this is hardly surprising. Russia and China are both run by arrogant, totalitarian regimes that tolerate no dissent. So it really shouldn't be surprising that they find empathy with Maduro. Um, what I think this is an opportunity for Western democracies to do is not have a repeat of Syria. What happened in Syria, Putin backed a blood-drenched dictator, and unfortunately, Russia got the upper hand. For a range of reasons, they won in some ways the propaganda war. I think they're dead wrong, but they managed to manipulate public thinking with the lies from RT, and it's pretty disgusting and shameful that the Putin administration backs a man who gasses children. No, I don't think Venezuela is necessarily going to end up in a civil war on the scale of that going on in Syria, but this is a very dangerous situation. One thing is absolutely clear: every day that Maduro is in office, the Venezuelan people suffer more. And I don't think it's a case that when there's a regime change, everything's going to change overnight. Of course not. But it's very obvious that Maduro has no democratic mandate. And let's look at what's going to happen in the coming days. We're going to see Venezuelans coming out and supporting Maduro. They're going to be waving flags and they're going to say, we resist the imperialist plot. But this is a complete PR stunt. This is what dictators do. This is what dictatorships do. Assad done the same thing. The simple fact is, as soon as Maduro disregarded the National Assembly, he became a dictator. And so he's an illegitimate leader of this country. I hope the situation doesn't escalate to the point of war, but I don't know. I'm just going to be looking at the situation as this develops. But I think we need to, and by we, I mean all freedom loving countries, need to really be assertive here and absolutely back the opposition. I want to see Russia and China humiliated because for too damn long they have been getting things their way where brutal dictators have, well, particularly in the case of Syria, just got away with too much for too long. You know, the rampant human rights abuses, the economic crisis. I think it's staggering that socialists are so blinded by their dogma that they really think that it's all a big plot by America. So they dismiss all of Venezuela's problems. Oh, it's all America's fault. Excuse me, but Maduro and Chavez before him have been ruling that country with an iron fist for 2 decades. There comes a point when you have to look in the mirror and say, well, maybe it's the policies. Maybe it is this dogmatic socialist ideology. Um, you know, obviously, there is a history of CIA involvement in other countries, and I'm not for a second suggesting that the CIA is morally upright. It's done some very pretty bad things in the past. There's no question about it. And it is true that in the 1980s, the Reagan and Bush administrations propped up Latin American dictators because they happened to be ideologically on the side of the West. Speaking for myself, you could be damn sure whenever there is a situation of a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime versus democracy, when it comes a choice of human rights versus human liberty, I will always, always, always back democracy, freedom, and human rights over authoritarianism, always, whether it be left wing or right wing. But in this particular situation, it is left wing. And I think Corbyn, the fact that Corbyn supported this just shows how unfit he is for number 10. What we're going to see from Corbyn in the coming days is total silence, which is shameful because he knows damn well that he backed the losing horse. Um, and I think it's a travesty for Corbyn to talk about human rights. When Castro died, Corbyn was gushing in his praise. Um, so the left really is selective, or I should say the hard left is very selective when they talk about human rights. Now you can argue the hard right is as well, but the point here is Maduro cannot stay in office. For too long, the Venezuelan people have suffered. I can't even imagine a situation where children are suffering because they can't afford the medicine. Their parents are suffering. I mean, I experienced a very bad toothache 2 years ago. It was agony. I was totally distracted. But I'm in a country where there's a solution for that. I went to the Newcastle Dental Hospital. It got solved. In Venezuela, anyone going through something like that, and people don't think about these sort of things, but this is what happens. They basically have to just put up with the pain because the economic crisis is such that the medicine is not available, and it's tragic. It's completely tragic, and it was unavoidable. I mean, it was avoidable. This is entirely brought about by Chavism, well, Bolivarianism, promoted by Hugo Chavez. Chavez and Maduro have brought the country to utter ruin. And just like all dictators, what do? They blame Uncle Sam. They blame imperialism as a distraction. That's a way to distract their supporters from what is really happening here. Of course, America's interested. Of course, it's got vested interests. But if you want to dismiss this as, oh, it's America interfering, well, what about Canada? What about Britain? What about the rest of Latin America? All these countries are now saying it's time for Maduro to go. So are they all wrong? And Maduro's right? Get a grip. Are you really going to back Nicolas Maduro and the Putin regime in Moscow and the Xi regime in Beijing over a democratic will for change? Keeping on the issue of democracy and people power, it looks like it is the beginning of the end of the Bashir dictatorship in Sudan, one of the world's most brutal regimes. Sudan's a country with a very, very troubled history, several very bloody conflicts. Um, I hope that, well, I hope every dictatorship goes in the world, left wing or right wing, but certainly Sudan, seeing the back of that one will be a good thing. And there is some good news from the Democratic Republic of Congo. It looks like for once there are some cause for optimism for that country. There has been a regime change, but it looks like it went peacefully. Whether it was free and fair is a matter of debate, but at least it went peacefully, and that's something that is to be welcomed. The DRC is a huge country. It's got a swathe of problems. It's chronically poor. It's went through the deadliest conflict since World War II. So those are two countries that I'm really thinking about now as well, Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I'm going to watch developments in Venezuela, and to those apologists for Maduro, shame on you. This is a man who's run his country with an iron fist, who's brought his country to utter ruin, and there comes a point, you may not like America, but there comes a point when you have to say, well, it's just some of this actually, maybe, just maybe, the fault of their own policies.